We're having fun in a fucking cop car.
Yep. Tristan.
What's up, guys?
Yep.
Tristan, if you fucking walk out the damn...
When you see this in a month.
Why? Do I look white? Oh, apparently.
When teenagers commit serious crimes, the consequences can be life-changing. From a reckless decision behind the wheel to a planned betrayal, here are 4 cases of teens who reacted to their life sentences. Mackenzie Shirilla. Mackenzie Shirilla, at the age of 18, found herself in a situation that would change her life forever. One night in July, Mackenzie decided to drive while under the influence of alcohol. Her car, a Toyota Camry, was speeding down a road in Ohio. At a speed much higher than the limit, she lost control of the car and crashed it into a brick wall. Her passenger, her friend, died on the spot due to the crash. Mackenzie survived, but had to face the consequences of her reckless actions. The authorities quickly determined that she had been driving drunk and well above the speed limit at the time of the accident. As the investigation continued, it became clear that her dangerous decision to drink and drive was the direct cause of her friend's death. The courtroom was tense as Mackenzie faced the charges of vehicular homicide. The prosecutor focused on how her poor judgment and reckless actions had caused the death of a young person who trusted her to drive safely. Evidence was shown in court that included the speed she was driving at the time of the crash and the fact that she had consumed alcohol before getting behind the wheel. Her defense tried to argue that it was an accident, but the prosecution made it clear that her choice to drink and drive made the crash more than just a simple mistake. As the trial continued, witnesses were called to testify about Mackenzie's behavior leading up to the accident. Some people mentioned that she had been drinking heavily earlier in the evening, and that she had insisted on driving despite being told not to. Others spoke about how she had been a good student and never showed any signs of being reckless before this incident. But in the end, none of that could change what had happened on that night. The victim's family was present in the courtroom throughout the trial, and their grief was clear as they listened to the details of how their loved one had died. The jury had to decide whether Mackenzie's actions were a result of pure recklessness or if it was simply an unfortunate accident. Aiden Fuji. Aiden Fuji was 17 years old when he was involved in a serious crime that shocked his community. He was a student who, on the surface, seemed like a typical teenager. But underneath, he was hiding a much darker side. One day, after months of tension and planning, Aiden made the decision to carry out a violent attack on a fellow student at his high school. Armed with a knife, Aiden confronted the other student in the school hallway and, in a sudden and brutal attack, stabbed the victim multiple times. The victim died from the injuries while other students watched in shock and horror. The school went into lockdown immediately after the attack, and police were called to the scene. Aiden was arrested on the spot, still holding the weapon in his hand. His reason for the attack was not clear at first, but as the investigation continued, more details came out about what might have driven him to such an act. It turned out that there had been ongoing conflict between Aiden and the victim, possibly over bullying or a personal dispute. But whatever the reason, the violent action shocked everyone who knew him. Teachers described Aiden as quiet, but didn't see any signs that he was capable of such an attack. His family was equally surprised, having seen him as a normal kid with some struggles like anyone else. As the legal process moved forward, Aiden was charged with first-degree murder due to the planning and execution of the crime. The evidence against him was overwhelming, as there were many witnesses to the attack, and the weapon had been found in his possession. The court had to consider the fact that Aiden was still a minor, but the nature of the crime was so serious that the prosecution pushed for him to be tried as an adult. In court, Aiden remained quiet and expressionless as the details of the attack were recounted. The victim's family sat in the audience, devastated by their loss. Aiden's defense tried to argue that he had been pushed to the edge by bullying and that he hadn't fully understood the consequences of his actions. When Aiden heard the verdict, he looked down at the floor, not showing much emotion. The judge gave him a long sentence, ensuring that Aiden would spend many years in prison. At the moment of sentencing, Aiden's family wept quietly in the back of the courtroom, but Aiden himself remained silent. He was taken away in handcuffs, and as he left the courtroom, it was clear that his life, too, had been changed forever by a single, violent decision. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale, both 16 years old, were involved in a shocking crime that would haunt their small town forever. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale, both 16 at the time, committed a crime that left their community in disbelief. The two teenagers, once considered typical high school students, planned and carried out the murder of their Spanish teacher, Nohema Graber, at Fairfield High School in Iowa. The crime was brutal and deliberate, and their motive appeared to be centered around frustration over grades. The murder took place after school hours, and the teacher's body was later found hidden in a park under a tarp, wheelbarrow, and railroad ties. Miller and Goodale had been openly discussing their plan to kill their teacher, even exchanging messages about it. These messages were found during the investigation, and it became clear that they had plotted the crime in detail. Surveillance footage from the area near the park, along with witness reports, placed the boys at the scene around the time of the murder. Despite their age, the crime was treated with the seriousness it demanded. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and both teenagers were arrested soon after the discovery of the body. In court, the prosecution presented the case with clarity, showing the premeditated nature of the crime and the gruesome way in which it was carried out. Both Miller and Goodale were tried as adults due to the severity of the crime. Their defense teams tried to argue that they were young and didn't fully grasp the gravity of their actions, but the messages they exchanged and the deliberate steps they took to hide the body told a different story. The jury saw the crime for what it was, a calculated murder by two young men who chose to act out their frustrations in the most violent way possible. The courtroom was filled with a sense of sorrow and anger as the verdict was read. Both Miller and Goodale were found guilty, and the judge sentenced them to long prison terms. When they heard their sentences, neither showed much emotion at first. Miller looked down at his hands while Goodale kept his eyes straight ahead. But as they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, both teenagers seemed to finally realize the weight of what had happened. Their lives, once filled with the usual worries of school and friends, were now defined by a single horrific act. Nohema Graber's family, while relieved that justice was served, still had to live with the pain of losing a loved one in such a brutal way. As Miller and Goodale left the courtroom for the last time, their faces remained blank, but the silence in the room said everything. Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy were 16-year-old best friends who shocked the world with the murder of their close friend Skylar Neese. Skylar was a bright and outgoing teenager who was close to both Rachel and Sheila. The three of them were often seen together, but underneath the surface, tension had been building between them. Rachel and Sheila decided to solve their problem in the most horrific way possible. They planned to kill Skylar, believing it was the only way to end their friendship issues. On a summer night in 2012, Rachel and Sheila convinced Skylar to sneak out of her home in West Virginia for a late-night drive. Unaware of their plan, Skylar got into the car with her two friends, thinking it was just another night of fun. The girls drove to a secluded area in Pennsylvania, where Rachel and Sheila suddenly turned on Skylar. Armed with kitchen knives, they stabbed Skylar multiple times until she collapsed. The girls then hid her body in a nearby wooded area, covering it with rocks and leaves. They left her there and returned home, pretending nothing had happened. For months, Rachel and Sheila acted as if they knew nothing about Skylar's disappearance. They even helped in the search efforts, posting messages on social media about how much they missed their friend. But the truth eventually came out when Rachel had a breakdown and confessed to the murder. She led authorities to Skylar's body, and the full story of the murder came to light. Sheila was arrested soon after Rachel's confession, and both girls were charged with first-degree murder. In court, the details of the crime shocked everyone. The fact that two teenage girls had planned and carried out the brutal murder of their friend was difficult to comprehend. Their reason for the murder seemed to be that they no longer wanted to be friends with Skylar, but instead of ending the friendship, they chose to kill her. The cold and calculated nature of the crime left a lasting impact on everyone who heard the story. Rachel Schoaf eventually expressed remorse for her actions, crying during her sentencing. Sheila Eddy, however, remained emotionless throughout the trial and showed no signs of regret. Both girls were sentenced to long prison terms, and their lives were forever changed by their decision to kill their friend. So, what do you think about this? Comment down your thoughts right now. And while you're down there, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well.